My name is Clara Jensen, 29 years old, and I never thought a public pronouncement could shatter my world. I still remember standing in my father's study, reading the formal disinheritance papers, each word a cold dismissal of my chosen path. My father, Dr. Arthur Hayes, a renowned professor of classical literature, stood rigidly across his expansive study, the late afternoon sun glinting off his wire-rimmed glasses as he watched me. His hands, usually gesturing eloquently over ancient texts, now held a single, crisp document, the formal papers that declared me, Emily Hayes, no longer his heir. My mother, Eleanor, a literary critic whose words could dissect any author's intent, sat in her armchair, her gaze fixed on a distant, unseen point beyond the window, her silence louder than any shout. My sister, Dr. Victoria Hayes, a brilliant historian, shifted uncomfortably in the doorway, a sympathetic but ultimately detached observer. The air in the room, usually thick with the scent of old books and intellectual debate, felt thin, suffocating. Each clause of the disinheritance, meticulously crafted by our family lawyers, chipped away at the world I had known, a world where academic achievement was the only currency, and manual labor was, as my father had bellowed at a grand family dinner weeks prior, a disgraceful pursuit utterly beneath the Hayes name. The memory of that dinner, the hushed whispers, the judgmental glances, still burned. I had dared to choose a life of grease and gears, of tangible creation rather than abstract theory, and for that, I was being formally expunged from the family legacy. The papers were just a formality. The emotional severing had already occurred. What would you do in a situation like that? Would you fight back, or would you find your own path, as I did? Leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to hear what happened later in my story. Growing up in the Hayes household wasn't just about living. It was about existing within a meticulously curated academic exhibition. Our home, a sprawling Victorian nestled in the leafy, intellectual enclave of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was less a residence and more a living library. Each room brimmed with first editions, scholarly journals, and awards gleaming silently from polished mahogany shelves. The scent of aged paper and leather was a constant companion, a perfume of intellect that seemed to cling to everything. My father, Dr. Arthur Hayes, was a towering figure in classical literature, his lectures at Harvard legendary, his publications seminal works of critical thought. His very presence commanded an air of intellectual gravitas, a silent expectation that permeated every corner of our lives. He moved with a deliberate, measured pace, his voice resonating with carefully chosen words, each sentence a miniature essay. He expected the same precision and depth from everyone around him, particularly his daughters. My mother, Eleanor Hayes, a respected literary critic with an equally formidable intellect, moved through this world with an elegant precision. Her conversations wove seamlessly between obscure poetic forms and complex philosophical debates, often leaving others struggling to keep up. She cultivated an aura of refined erudition, ensuring that every piece of art, every book, every word spoken in our home adhered to the highest standards of intellectual discourse. Dinner conversations were less about daily happenings and more about dissecting current events through a historical lens or debating the merits of postmodernism. Laughter was rare, replaced by polite, intellectual murmurs of agreement or nuanced, scholarly disagreement. And then there was my older sister, Dr. Victoria Hayes. Victoria was the golden child, the embodiment of everything my parents valued. A prodigious talent, she'd followed seamlessly in their footsteps, earning her Ph.D. in history from Yale before landing a coveted professorship at a prestigious university. Her accomplishments were recited at every family gathering, her insights lauded, her future seemingly boundless. Victoria was the perfect heir to the Hayes intellectual dynasty, effortlessly embodying the prestige, the discernment, and the academic prowess that defined our family. Her flawless academic record was a constant, unspoken challenge, a benchmark that I, Emily, was expected to meet and, ideally, surpass. Victoria's path was the blueprint, the unspoken curriculum that I was expected to follow without question. From an early age, my days were filled with academic tutoring, classical music lessons on a grand piano that dominated our living room, and debates over historical minutiae that often left my head spinning. All of it was designed to mold me into another shining intellectual in the Hayes lineage. My parents saw the world through the lens of academia, believing that true value lay only in the pursuit of knowledge, in abstract thought, in the realm of theory and scholarly discourse. Any deviation from this path was not just undesirable. It was an aberration, a threat to the carefully constructed narrative of the Hayes family's intellectual supremacy. My childhood was a carefully orchestrated symphony of intellectual pursuits, a constant striving for academic perfection. Every extracurricular activity, every summer camp, every book I read was chosen to align with this singular vision of scholarly excellence. My parents believed they were guiding me toward a life of profound significance, unaware that their carefully laid plans were slowly suffocating my spirit. Yet, even as a child, my hands yearned for something different. While Victoria immersed herself in ancient texts, meticulously annotating margins and writing dense academic papers, I was drawn to the mechanics of things, to the way objects worked, to the profound satisfaction of taking something apart and putting it back together. A broken toy, a sputtering lawnmower in our neighbor's yard, a faulty appliance, these were my puzzles, my true intellectual challenges. I found solace and profound satisfaction in the tactile world, in the tangible results of my efforts. The greasy gears of a bicycle chain, the intricate wiring of a discarded lamp, the satisfying click of a well-fitted puzzle piece. These were the things that truly captivated me. I spent hours in our small, rarely used shed, tinkering with whatever discarded gadgets I could find, my fingers learning the language of nuts, bolts, and circuits. The smell of oil and metal was a comfort, a counterpoint to the sterile scent of paper in the house. My parents, of course, dismissed this as a phase, a quirky eccentricity that would surely fade once I matured and embraced my true calling. My father would gently steer me away from the garage, his voice laced with a subtle distaste. "A Hayes's hands are meant for books, Emily, not grease," he'd remind me, carefully wiping a smudge from my cheek with a crisp handkerchief. My mother would offer polite but firm suggestions. "Perhaps you should consider a classical music instrument, dear, rather than dismantling that dreadful radio. Such a lovely violin sits idle." These were not direct condemnations then, but soft, persistent nudges back onto their predetermined path, subtly implying that my interests were not only trivial but fundamentally misaligned with the Hayes identity. My hobbies were tolerated as long as they remained hobbies, never threatening to become a profession. The idea that a Hayes would choose a trade over a profession was simply unthinkable, a concept so foreign it didn't even warrant serious discussion in their intellectual circles. My hands, which craved the tangible, were expected to navigate only the abstract. The pressure mounted as I approached college. The expectation was clear, etched into every family conversation, every dinner table debate. An Ivy League institution, a rigorous academic program, and a trajectory towards a professorship or a similar esteemed intellectual profession. My parents had already begun subtly networking on my behalf, mentioning my brilliant potential to their colleagues at university functions. I tried to conform, I truly did. I applied to the right schools, wrote essays filled with academic platitudes that felt utterly false, and even enrolled in a prestigious liberal arts college. Majoring in philosophy, a subject my father deemed the purest form of intellectual pursuit. For 2 years, I sat in dimly lit lecture halls, debated Cartesian dualism, and dissected ancient Greek texts. But my spirit felt increasingly constricted, my mind yearning for something real, something concrete. The abstract theories, the endless discussions that never seemed to lead to a tangible outcome, left me feeling hollow, like an empty vessel. My hands, which had felt so restless and unfulfilled clutching textbooks, now yearned for the tactile satisfaction of a wrench, the satisfying grind of a working engine. I understood on a visceral level that my definition of meaningful work was fundamentally different from my family's. My academic performance, while still high, began to subtly slip. I found it harder and harder to feign interest, to concentrate on subjects that held no resonance for me. My grades, though still respectable, were no longer perfect, a small but telling sign of my inner rebellion. The cognitive dissonance was immense, a constant, gnawing discomfort that manifested in a quiet anxiety, a feeling of being perpetually out of place. The prestigious campus, with its Gothic architecture and hallowed halls, felt less like a sanctuary of learning and more like a gilded cage, trapping me in a life that wasn't my own. Every passing day, the chasm between who I was and who they expected me to be grew wider, until it felt like an unbridgeable canyon. I would stare out of my dorm room window, watching the city below, longing for the grease and grit of a mechanic's shop. The formal disinheritance papers I later held in my father's study, each word a cold dismissal of my chosen path, were merely the final, official pronouncement of a truth I had already known in my heart. I was not, and never would be, the Hayes daughter they envisioned. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet epiphany in the midst of a particularly dry lecture on post-structuralism. I was sitting in a dimly lit auditorium, surrounded by earnest young scholars, as the professor droned on about the deconstruction of meaning. My mind, however, was miles away, consumed by a far more urgent and tangible problem. The persistent rattling sound I'd heard from the worn engine of my beat-up sedan that morning. I found myself mentally tracing the source of the noise, visualizing the engine's components, the subtle interplay of metal and fluid, the potential points of failure. The professor's words faded into an indistinguishable murmur, replaced by the insistent hum of an imagined engine, pulling me away from the abstract and into the real. The air in the lecture hall, usually thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, felt suddenly thin, stifling. I could almost feel the weight of countless academic theories pressing down on me, theories that seemed to offer no practical solutions, no tangible results. My anxiety, a constant companion in these hallowed halls, began to recede, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying clarity. In that moment, a fundamental truth asserted itself. This intellectual pursuit, this life they had mapped out for me, was not my own. It was a borrowed garment, ill-fitting and suffocating. The thought of spending my days dissecting academic texts filled me with an existential dread that outweighed any fear of my parents' disapproval. I rose from my seat, not bothering to make eye contact with the few students who glanced my way, and walked out of the lecture hall, leaving behind the hushed reverence of academia for the clamor of my own burgeoning conviction. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a soft thud, a symbolic closing of a chapter I never truly wanted to write. My first stop was the university registrar's office. With a steady hand that surprised even myself, I filled out the withdrawal forms. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed, stark and unforgiving, but I felt a strange sense of peace. There were questions, of course, from well-meaning advisors and incredulous department heads. "Are you sure, Miss Hayes? You're on the dean's list. You have such promise in this field," Mr. Harrison, my academic advisor, had inquired, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Your father, Dr. Hayes, speaks so highly of your intellectual gifts. Are you certain this isn't just a moment of stress?" Each question was a subtle pressure to reconsider, to fall back into line, to conform to the prestigious image the Hayes name commanded. But I stood firm, polite but resolute. "Yes, I'm sure," I repeated, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, as if shedding a heavy, invisible cloak. The weight of their expectations, the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't, began to lift with each signature. It was a terrifying leap into the unknown, but it was also exhilarating, an act of radical self-acceptance. I knew, with an almost primal certainty, that my true calling lay not in the sterile halls of academia, but in the gritty, honest world of practical creation. My hands, which had felt so restless and unfulfilled clutching textbooks, now yearned for the tactile satisfaction of a wrench, the satisfying grind of a working engine. I understood on a visceral level that my definition of meaningful work was fundamentally different from my family's. It was about solving tangible problems, about the satisfaction of a job well done that I could see and feel, not merely conceptualize. The phone call to my father was, predictably, a detonation. I chose a quiet moment, late in the evening, after the day's scholarly pursuits had presumably concluded. The silence on the other end of the line, before he picked up, was heavy with the expectation of my confession. "Father," I began, my voice wavering slightly despite my resolve, "I've withdrawn from the university." A beat of stunned silence stretched across the line, thick and suffocating with unspoken questions. Then, his voice, usually modulated and precise, erupted. "Withdrawn? Emily, have you lost your mind? Do you understand the implications of this? The Hayes name, our reputation." He launched into a tirade that spanned everything from the financial investment they had made in my education to the supposed disgrace I was bringing upon our family lineage. He invoked ancestors I barely knew, scholars and intellectuals whose portraits lined our hallways, as if their collective judgment weighed upon me through the phone line. He called it a monumental error, a catastrophic misjudgment of character. He spoke of shame, of embarrassment, of how this would reflect on him, on Mother, on Victoria, as if my choices were merely an extension of their public image, a blemish on their perfectly crafted facade. He even brought up a distant cousin who had, years ago, left a promising academic career to become a chef, as if this were proof of some inherited genetic predisposition to irrationality. "You're just like Cousin Thomas," he'd spat, throwing away a brilliant mind for a trade. Then came the ultimatum, delivered with chilling clarity. "Fix this mistake immediately, Emily, or your tuition payments, any financial support whatsoever, stops tomorrow. And do not expect to be welcomed back into this house or this family until you choose a path befitting a Hayes." His words were designed to break me, to force me back into the gilded cage of academia. He believed, as they all did, that financial dependence was the ultimate leash, that without their support, I would inevitably falter and return to their embrace, repentant and compliant. But something inside me had shifted irrevocably. The anxieties that had plagued me for years, the panic attacks that had become an almost daily occurrence, had receded, replaced by a quiet strength, a sense of self-possession I had never known. "That's fair, Father," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of the desperation he expected. The surprising tranquility in my tone seemed to momentarily disarm him. The line went silent again, perhaps in stunned disbelief at my lack of expected capitulation. As I hung up, a profound sense of peace settled over me, a feeling of pure, unadulterated liberation. The decision was made. I was free. I was terrified, yes, but more importantly, I was finally, truly, myself. The formal papers I would read later in his study were merely the written confirmation of this fundamental, internal choice, a legal punctuation mark on a declaration I had already made in my soul. I knew in that moment that the path ahead would be difficult, but it would be my own. The classified ad was unremarkable, tucked away in the back pages of a local newspaper I'd picked up from a dusty rack at a diner. "Apprentice mechanic needed, small shop, will train." It was just a few lines of text, but to me, it felt like a beacon, a direct answer to the restless yearning in my hands and the quiet conviction in my soul. 2 days after my explosive phone call with my father, with my meager savings as my only buffer, I walked into Griffin's Auto Repair, a small, unpretentious garage tucked away on a side street in Somerville. The air was thick with the honest sense of oil, gasoline, and metal, a stark contrast to the sterile, intellectual fragrance of my former life. The walls were adorned not with framed diplomas or meticulously arranged bookshelves, but with faded calendars featuring classic cars and grease-stained tools hanging in precise, practiced order. This was my new classroom, my new library, and every bolt, every wrench, every speck of rust was a lesson waiting to be learned. The owner, a gruff but kind man named Frank Griffin, eyed my clean hands and university-branded sweatshirt with a skeptical look. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaling a cloud of smoke that momentarily obscured his face. "You're a bit overqualified, aren't you, kid?" he rasped, his voice gravelly, his eyes narrowing. "Most folks who walk in here for an apprenticeship have been tinkering since they were toddlers, not fresh out of a college dorm. This ain't no philosophy class." I met his gaze directly, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. "I'm not qualified at all, sir," I admitted honestly, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I've never had the chance to truly learn, not in the way I want to. I've never actually made anything that matters, not in the way you do here, but I'm eager, I learn fast, and I'm not afraid of hard work or getting my hands dirty." I extended a hand, palm up, revealing the soft, unmarked skin. "These hands," I said, a quiet challenge in my voice, "are ready to learn." Frank grunted, a sound that could have been dismissal or grudging approval. He took another drag, considering me. He asked me a few basic questions about engine components, questions I surprisingly knew the answers to, thanks to years of quiet, self-taught fascination and late-night dives into online car forums. He saw a spark of genuine curiosity in my eyes, a determination that transcended my polished appearance. He hired me on the spot with a caveat. "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m., no excuses. And if you're still here in a week, we'll talk about pay." The terms were clear, brutal, and exactly what I needed. My first day on the shop floor was an overwhelming sensory assault. The clatter of tools, the whine of power drills, the distinct aroma of hot oil and burning rubber, it was a symphony of purposeful labor. Each sound, each smell was a testament to real work, tangible results. Frank assigned me to Maria, a seasoned mechanic with forearms like steel cables and eyes that missed nothing. Maria, unlike my family, didn't care about my past academic credentials. She cared only about my willingness to learn, my attention to detail, and my ability to follow instructions. She didn't waste words, but her actions spoke volumes. She demonstrated, patiently at first, then with increasing expectation, the proper grip of a wrench, the precise angle to remove a bolt, the subtle art of listening to an engine's whispers. "These machines," she explained, holding up a delicate fuel injector, its metal glinting under the fluorescent lights, "they're complex. Each part has a purpose. Miss one screw, one gasket, and the whole system fails. People rely on their cars to get to work, to doctors. We keep their lives moving, that's why we're here." Her words resonated deeply within me. For the first time, my work had immediate, tangible consequences. It mattered. There was no room for abstract theory or vague interpretations, only precise action and measurable results. Unlike the shame I'd known in academia, where mistakes were intellectual failings leading to public humiliation, here, mistakes were treated as essential parts of mastery, opportunities for learning, for improvement, often accompanied by a patient explanation or a gruff correction. "Learn from it, Emily," Frank would say, looking at a stripped screw or a misaligned part. "That's how we get better." The other mechanics, a diverse crew from backgrounds my parents would have dismissed as unintellectual or common, welcomed me without judgment. They saw a fellow worker, not a disinherited academic. They taught me patience, the subtle language of an engine's tremors, the art of diagnostics that went beyond a computer screen, and the profound satisfaction of a job well done. We'd share lukewarm coffee from a battered thermos, trade jokes, and offer advice on tricky repairs. My small studio apartment in Somerville, a stark contrast to my sprawling childhood home, felt like a haven. It was modest, yes, with mismatched furniture and a lingering scent of car grease, but it was mine, paid for with my own honest sweat. Every creak of the floorboards, every worn patch on the rug, felt like a testament to my burgeoning independence. My mother's calls, when they came, were still filled with thinly veiled condescension. "A factory worker, Emily? Have you lost your mind completely?" she'd hissed, her voice laced with disgust at my description of my work. When she asked what I was making, I told her, "I'm fixing cars, Mother, keeping people safe on the roads, helping them get to where they need to be. It's honest work." She left without another word, her silent judgment palpable even through the phone line. 6 months in, Frank called me into his office. "Emily," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips, "Maria says you've got a natural aptitude. Your attention to detail is exceptional. I'm making you an official junior mechanic and will bump up your pay. You're becoming indispensable." I called my sister, Victoria, to share the news, hoping for a flicker of genuine pride. There was a pause. "Oh, that's nice, Emily," she said awkwardly, her voice tight. "Mom's telling everyone you're taking a gap year to find yourself before returning to grad school, to maintain appearances." "I found myself, Victoria," I replied, a quiet strength in my voice. "I'm just not who she wanted me to be." The conversation ended quickly, a stark reminder of the chasm that now separated us, a chasm of understanding and acceptance that felt wider than any intellectual divide. I was learning to accept this reality, to internalize the truth that their perception of me no longer defined my worth. My family's initial shock regarding my departure from academia and my choice of profession gradually hardened into a concentrated, relentless campaign to save me from what they considered to be a catastrophic descent into social and intellectual obscurity. This wasn't a subtle attempt at persuasion. It was a strategic, multi-pronged assault on my newfound contentment, designed to break my resolve and force me back into the mold they had so meticulously crafted for me. My father, Dr. Arthur Hayes, ever the pragmatist, initiated the financial offensives. He would call, his voice dripping with faux concern, offering to pay for an MBA at a top-tier business school or a fully funded PhD program in a more suitable field. "Emily," he'd explain, as if reasoning with a particularly stubborn child, his tone carefully modulated to convey disappointment rather than anger. "This phase is fine for now, but surely you understand the long-term implications. A Hayes simply doesn't have this kind of vocation. Think of your future, think of your potential, think of the opportunities you're squandering." He spoke of potential as if it were a quantifiable commodity, something to be maximized in the pursuit of prestige, rather than an internal wellspring of talent and passion. Each offer was a gilded cage, designed to lure me back with the promise of financial security and academic validation, but I saw through the thinly veiled manipulation. The underlying message was clear. My work was not just an inconvenience, but a genuine threat to their perception of family excellence. My mother, Eleanor, resorted to emotional warfare. Her calls alternated between tearful pleas about wasting my brilliance and cold fury, her voice a sharp instrument of condemnation. "You're breaking your mother's heart, Emily," she'd sob, her voice cracking with performative grief, sounding as though she were reading lines from a tragic play. "I can barely look at my friends anymore without feeling a profound sense of shame. They ask about you, and I have to invent stories, ridiculous fabrications to spare us all the embarrassment of having a mechanic in the family." She painted a picture of herself as a suffering martyr, burdened by my choices, as if my pursuit of happiness were a direct attack on her social standing, a wound inflicted upon her very being. Her shame was presented as a weapon, wielded to inflict guilt and compel my return to their fold, her words carefully chosen to maximize their emotional impact. She even tried to orchestrate accidental meetings with former professors and family friends, hoping their gentle nudges and thinly veiled criticisms would persuade me to reconsider. My sister, Victoria, the ever-perfect academic, deployed more subtle, insidious tactics. She would send me carefully curated job listings for executive assistant positions at prestigious research institutions or junior librarian roles at elite universities, each accompanied by a patronizing note. "Just in case, dear, something to fall back on perhaps if this experiment doesn't pan out. It's a shame to let your intellect simply gather dust." These were not acts of kindness, but subtle reminders of my supposed intellectual inferiority, a constant undermining of my chosen path, implying that my work as a mechanic was a temporary, desperate measure, a fleeting detour from an inevitable return to the real world of academia. Her calls would often include passive-aggressive comments about how different my life must be now, how unstimulating compared to the vibrant intellectual debates she enjoyed. For a time, their relentless pressure might have worked. The old anxieties, the fear of disappointing them, the ingrained need for their approval, lingered like faint echoes in my mind. The weight of their disapproval was a heavy shroud, threatening to smother the budding joy I found in my work. But something profound had shifted within me. With each engine I rebuilt, each complex diagnostic I solved, each classic car I painstakingly restored, my confidence grew, hardening like tempered steel. I began to recognize my own value, separate and distinct from their narrow metrics of prestige, income, and academic accolades. My hands, once clumsy with uncertainty, now moved with a practiced grace, translating theoretical knowledge into tangible, working solutions. The grease under my fingernails, once a source of shame, became a badge of honor, a visible mark of my competence and dedication. After a year at Griffin's Auto Repair, Frank promoted me to team lead, acknowledging my natural talent and exceptional problem-solving skills. My salary increased, allowing me to move into a slightly larger apartment, a small but significant symbol of my growing independence. The persistent fog of anxiety that had shadowed my college years lifted, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of purpose, a deep satisfaction that came from honest, meaningful work. "You seem different, Emily," Maria, my mentor at the shop, commented one day, observing me as I meticulously reassembled a carburetor. Her keen eyes, usually focused on engine parts, now scrutinized my face. "When you started, you looked scared all the time, like a deer in headlights, all that tension in your shoulders. Now you look strong, confident." The word strong resonated deeply within me, settling comfortably in my chest. I was strong, not just physically from the demands of my work, but strong in my convictions, strong in my skills, strong in my burgeoning independence. I had built this strength, piece by piece, with my own hands and my own will. Holiday gatherings became strained, uncomfortable exercises in tension. My parents would vaguely introduce me as still exploring her options, their voices laced with an unspoken apology to their guests for my presence, as if I were a distant, slightly embarrassing relative. "Still at that garage, dear?" my mother would ask, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of concern and thinly veiled disdain, her eyes darting to Victoria, who would offer a sympathetic but dismissive glance. "Still keeping people safe on the road, mother?" I would answer, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. My simple, honest reply always ended the conversation, leaving a palpable silence in its wake, a stark reminder of their discomfort with authenticity. By my second year, I rarely spoke to my parents, and conversations with Victoria carried an undercurrent of discomfort, as if my career choice had created an insurmountable language barrier, a fundamental inability to connect. I was learning to accept this new normal, this quiet severing, understanding that their approval was a price I was no longer willing to pay. The pressure to conform still existed, but it no longer broke me. Instead, it solidified my resolve, reinforcing the shield of self-worth I had meticulously built around my true self. The more they pushed, the more rooted I became in my own chosen ground. The email arrived on a Tuesday, an unremarkable day that began with the familiar scent of engine oil and the low hum of a car lift. I had been at Griffin's Auto Repair for nearly 3 years, and the rhythm of the garage, the precise movements, the satisfying click of a perfectly tightened bolt, the shared camaraderie among the team had become the anchor of my new life. "Morning, Emily," Frank called out, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Got a tricky one for you today, a '72 Mustang, temperamental as they come, just your kind of challenge." "Sounds perfect, Frank," I smiled, rolling my sleeves up, feeling the familiar anticipation of a complex problem to solve. My hands, once delicate and accustomed to handling academic texts, were now calloused and strong, their strength a testament to my chosen path. The warmth of the garage, the familiar clang of metal, the banter of my colleagues, these were my new comforts, my new family. During my lunch break, as I scrolled through my personal emails, I saw it, an official-looking document from the Hayes family's legal firm. My stomach tightened instinctively. It wasn't a family group chat notification, but something far more formal, more final. The subject line simply read, Ray, Emily Hayes Family Estate Matters. My heart pounded a dull rhythm against my ribs as I opened the attachment. It was a formal legal document, an amendment to the family trust and estate planning, explicitly stating my removal as an heir, a beneficiary, and a recipient of any future financial provisions from my parents, Dr. Arthur and Alina Hayes. It referenced my persistent refusal to pursue a career path congruent with family values and expectations, citing my continued engagement in a trade deemed unsuitable for a member of the Hayes lineage. It wasn't just a threat. It was the cold, hard reality of their ultimate rejection, codified in legal jargon. The document felt heavy, even on my phone screen, each word a hammer blow against the last vestiges of my hope for their acceptance, a final, definitive declaration of their disapproval. My hands, usually steady and precise, trembled. The casual chatter of my coworkers faded into a distant buzz, their voices muffled by the sudden roaring in my ears. For a moment, I was that desperate, lost girl again, adrift without a clear path, terrified of my family's disapproval. A wave of old anxieties washed over me, threatening to pull me under. But then, as I scanned the legalese, I noticed something else, a clause that mentioned Victoria and my father's new, collaborative academic venture. A prestigious research project that would cement their legacy, securing their place at the pinnacle of intellectual society. Their disinheritance of me was clearly linked to their continued pursuit of an unblemished image, an unwavering commitment to the facade of intellectual perfection. This wasn't just about my career. It was about their carefully constructed narrative, and my existence as a mechanic was a flaw they could not tolerate, a dissonant note in their carefully composed symphony of success. Maria, passing by, noticed my ashen face. She stopped, her eyes, usually sharp and focused on the intricate workings of an engine, now soft with concern. "Emily, you look like you've seen a ghost. Everything all right?" I simply handed her my phone, pointing to the screen. She read the document, her brow furrowing, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding, devoid of judgment. "Your family is wrong, Emily," she said, her voice firm, pulling me into a tight, comforting hug, smelling faintly of oil and steel. "Dead wrong, you know about all of it. The skill, the dedication, the integrity you bring to this work. That's worth more than any family name, any degree, any fancy title." Her simple validation, offered in the greasy, honest confines of the garage, grounded me. "I'm starting to believe that, Maria," I whispered, a small, tremulous smile forming on my lips, tears pricking at my eyes. My colleagues, sensing my distress, formed a quiet, protective bubble around me for the rest of the shift, their silent support a stark contrast to my family's public condemnation and legalistic rejection. The warmth of their collective presence was a balm to my raw spirit. Driving home, the words from the legal document echoed in my mind: unsuitable, disgraceful, removed from lineage. The pretense was over. I was officially no longer a Hayes in their eyes, at least not in the way they defined it. The emotional battle had been long, but this formal declaration was the final, definitive severing. Yet, instead of despair, a surprising sense of clarity emerged. I realized this moment had been inevitable, that my family had just been waiting for me to falter, to return, to beg for their forgiveness and their financial support. Instead, I had built a life that brought me profound satisfaction, a career that resonated with my true self, and a quiet confidence that their disapproval could no longer shake. Perhaps that, I thought, was the true unforgivable offense in their eyes: my independent happiness, my success outside of their narrow, controlled world. Their attempt to cast me out had, in fact, set me free, propelling me towards a future where I could truly define my own success, unburdened by their suffocating expectations and the false narratives they clung to so fiercely. The formal disinheritance was not an ending, but a new, unwritten beginning. It was the moment I stopped looking back and started charting my own course, truly and completely. The legal document, though formally conclusive, served as an unexpected catalyst rather than a crushing blow. For months, I had been hovering in a state of uneasy truce with my family's unspoken disapproval, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my new life. This formal severing, however, eliminated the pretense, cutting the last emotional strings that tied me to their expectations. Part of me, a deep, primal part, had longed for their acceptance, for a single word of pride, a flicker of understanding. But that hope, fragile and persistent, was now unequivocally extinguished. What would winning even look like now? I asked myself, staring at the disinheritance papers spread across my small kitchen table, the harsh fluorescent light of my apartment glinting off the official seal. I couldn't force my parents to respect my choices or to acknowledge the validity of my path. I couldn't make them see the integrity in my grease-stained hands or the purpose in my daily work. The only person whose behavior I could control was my own. And that, I realized, was a profound power. I focused on my desired outcome, complete freedom from the emotional power my family still held over me, freedom from the lingering, foolish hope that they would someday see and love the real me. With steady hands, I composed a brief, professional email to their family lawyer, acknowledging receipt of the documents and stating my understanding. There was no anger, no defiance, just a calm, dignified acceptance. My tone was neutral, detached, a mirror of their own legalistic approach. I then quietly updated my phone contacts, moving my parents and Victoria from my favorites list to a separate, rarely accessed folder, a small but significant act of emotional detachment. This was a deliberate choice, a conscious prioritization of my own mental and emotional well-being over a toxic and unchangeable family dynamic. My small apartment in Somerville, once a symbol of my precarious independence, now felt like a haven, a sanctuary of self-possession. It was here, in this quiet space, unburdened by the weight of their judgment, that a new plan began to take shape, clear and resolute. The idea had been simmering for weeks, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind, and now it surged forward, bold and undeniable. My gaze drifted to a map tacked on my wall, a relic from a brief, forgotten phase of wanderlust before college. My finger traced the lines leading west, to California, a state synonymous with innovation, with forging new paths, with a boundless sense of possibility. Frank, my boss at Griffin's, had recently mentioned a colleague, an old friend named Elias, who ran a highly reputable classic car restoration shop in Los Angeles. Elias, Frank had said, was always looking for skilled, passionate talent, someone who understood the soul of a machine. The idea sparked a profound sense of anticipation within me. A clean break, a fresh start, a new horizon where the Hayes name held no sway, where my worth would be judged solely by my skill and integrity, not by my academic pedigree. The very next morning, before the garage lights had fully flickered on, I approached Frank. "Frank," I began, my voice firm with conviction, "I'd like to explore opportunities in California." "You mentioned Elias?" Frank, ever the understanding mentor, listened patiently, a quiet knowing in his eyes, sensing the depth of my resolve. He gave me Elias' number, a glowing recommendation, and a promise that the door at Griffin's would always be open if I ever chose to return. His support was a quiet affirmation, a final blessing before I embarked on this new chapter. 2 weeks later, declining multiple attempts at family reconciliation meetings, orchestrated by a suddenly concerned Victoria meetings that felt less like genuine overtures and more like desperate attempts to salvage appearances. And ignoring a flurry of increasingly desperate, guilt-ridden messages from my mother, I packed my few belongings. The formal disinheritance, it seemed, had jolted them into a panicked realization of my true independence. My trusty sedan, the one whose engine had first sparked my mechanical awakening, was now purring smoothly, a testament to my own learned skill, its familiar rumble a comforting companion. I drove west, leaving behind the hallowed, intellectual grounds of Cambridge for the sprawling, diverse landscape of California. This journey across America became a physical manifestation of my emotional transition, each mile sweeping away old thought patterns, ingrained expectations, and the lingering echoes of their disapproval. The vastness of the American landscape seemed to reflect the expansiveness of my own newly liberated spirit. In unfamiliar towns, at roadside diners, and amidst stunning natural landscapes, I embraced experiences my family would have dismissed as trivial or unrefined. I camped under stars in national parks, ate at greasy spoon diners with truckers and solo travelers, trading stories and shared glances of mutual understanding. I engaged in conversations with strangers whose lives were vastly different from the intellectual circles I had once navigated, their perspectives broadening my own in ways no textbook ever could. With each new vista, each new encounter, I felt myself expanding beyond the narrow confines of who I'd been raised to be, shedding the skin of the academic daughter and stepping more fully into the identity of Emily Hayes, the mechanic, the restorer, the one who built and repaired rather than merely theorized. The confrontation they expected, the tearful plea for forgiveness, never came. Instead, I gave myself the profound gift of peace, a quiet, internal liberation from the endless cycle of seeking their approval. The hum of my engine was my new anthem, carrying me towards a future defined solely by my own terms. The scent of pine trees, of desert dust, of ocean air replaced the academic scent of old paper, filling my lungs with a new kind of freedom. Los Angeles welcomed me with its characteristic blend of sunshine and the perpetual hum of traffic, a stark contrast to the historical quietude of Cambridge. The sprawling freeways, the eclectic neighborhoods, the sheer scale of the city felt invigorating, a vast canvas for a new life. Elias, Frank's old friend, turned out to be a man of few words but immense expertise, the owner of Timeless Motors, a renowned classic car restoration shop nestled in a bustling industrial district. The garage, unlike Griffin's, was larger, cleaner, and filled with gleaming vintage machines in various states of glorious disarray. On my first day, he watched me quietly as I inspected a vintage Porsche engine, my hands already accustomed to the dance of disassembling and reassembling, my fingers tracing the lines of the manifold, feeling for irregularities. "Frank said you were good," Elias finally grunted, a rare compliment from him, his voice low and raspy, "but he didn't say you were that good. Your diagnostics are sharp. You got an eye for it." This validation, offered in the honest, unpretentious environment of the garage, sent a warm current through me, a quiet affirmation that I was exactly where I was meant to be. My work, dismissed as a disgraceful trade by my family, was now earning genuine recognition from people who understood and valued its true worth, not its perceived social status. Elias quickly entrusted me with increasingly complex projects, recognizing my meticulous attention to detail and my problem-solving acumen. My suggestions for improving workflow and optimizing parts acquisition were implemented swiftly, demonstrating my practical intelligence in a way my academic family had never acknowledged or appreciated. Weekends in Los Angeles, initially daunting in their vastness, gradually filled with meaningful connections. I forced myself out of my comfort zone, joining a local vintage car club and attending classic car shows, where I met fellow enthusiasts who shared my passion for the meticulous art of restoration. It was at one of these shows that I met Ben, a quiet but deeply knowledgeable antique furniture restorer, whose hands, like mine, found solace and purpose in bringing old things back to life. He had a gentle demeanor, eyes that sparkled with intelligence, and a deep appreciation for craftsmanship. We bonded over the shared satisfaction of working with our hands, of preserving history, and of creating beauty from forgotten things. He introduced me to his network, a vibrant community of artisans, potters, woodworkers, jewelers, textile artists, who valued craftsmanship, dedication, and authenticity above all else. This community became my first anchor in LA society, a place where I felt truly seen and appreciated for who I was, not for what my family name represented. Here, my unconventional path was celebrated, not condemned. At Timeless Motors, I built strong professional relationships, earning the respect of my colleagues through hard work and demonstrable skill. My reputation grew with each flawlessly restored vehicle that rolled out of our shop, a testament to countless hours spent under the hood solving intricate puzzles. 1 month turned into 3, then 6. I found a charming bungalow in a quieter neighborhood, surrounded by lush green spaces and the scent of jasmine, slowly furnishing it with antique pieces that Ben helped me restore, each item carrying a story, much like the cars I worked on. It was a home filled with genuine warmth, a space I had truly built for myself. My family's sporadic, terse emails, usually forwarded through lawyers, were met with polite, brief responses, the vast geographical distance making emotional boundaries easier to maintain. Their messages were always short, never delving into personal details, always hinting at their continued academic triumphs, unaware of the real turmoil brewing beneath the surface of their impeccable lives. They would mention my father's upcoming book launch or Victoria's latest speaking engagement, their lives seemingly untouched by my absence, or so they desperately wanted me to believe. Then, one rainy afternoon, a call came from Victoria, my sister, shattering my carefully constructed peace. Her voice, usually so composed, so modulated, was thin, strained, on the verge of breaking, a tremor I'd never heard before. "Emily," she began, without preamble, her words tumbling out in a rush, I don't know who else to call. Father and Mother, it's Mitchell and Hayes Academic Press. They're under federal investigation." My mind raced, piecing together the fragmented information. Mitchell and Hayes Academic Press was the publishing house my father and Victoria had founded 2 years ago, specifically to publish my father's definitive, new treatise on classical philosophy, a work he claimed would be his crowning achievement, cementing his legacy. My mother, Eleanor, had overseen the publishing and marketing, leveraging her connections in literary circles to secure its widespread distribution and critical acclaim, often boasting about its unprecedented success. Victoria herself was listed as a co-editor and contributor on several key sections, lending her historical credibility to its philosophical arguments. "Investigation for what, Victoria?" I asked, my voice flat, a sudden chill running through me despite the warmth of the garage. The rhythmic hum of the machinery around me suddenly sounded discordant, a chaotic noise. Victoria's whispered reply was almost lost amidst the hum of a power sander nearby, then it became chillingly clear. Plagiarism, massive systemic plagiarism, and financial fraud. They've been using grant money for personal expenses, falsifying research data to secure more funding for the publishing house. It's a colossal Ponzi scheme, Emily. Their entire academic empire, everything they built, it's all fabricated. The news hit me with a shocking force. The treatise, the lectures, the awards, all built on a foundation of intellectual theft and financial deception. My father's definitive work was nothing but a house of cards, a monumental lie designed to solidify his crumbling reputation. "They've lost everything," Victoria's voice cracked, tears finally audible, her academic composure utterly shattered. "The house is being seized. Their bank accounts are frozen. Father, he's facing criminal charges. Mother is implicated in the financial schemes, too. It's all gone, Emily, everything." My first reaction was a wave of disbelief, then a strange, almost unsettling lack of satisfaction. There was no joy, no triumphant vindication, just a deep, hollow ache. The irony was profound, almost unbearable. My disgraceful trade, my hands-on work, had kept me clear of their intellectual and financial entanglements, protected me from the very web they had spun. I was the only Hayes, the only one of us, standing on solid ground, untainted by the rot they had cultivated. Victoria's next words confirmed the karmic twist. "They want to talk to you, Emily. They said you're the only one not financially tied to any of this. The only one who might be able to help. You're the only one left." I told Victoria I needed time to think, my mind reeling with the enormity of the news. Ben, sensing my distress, put a comforting hand on my shoulder, his touch a steadying presence. "What do you want to do, Em?" he asked softly, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. By morning, a painful but resolute clarity emerged, and I told Victoria, "I'll meet with them, but on my terms, not theirs. This time, there will be no more hidden truths." I flew to Boston alone, feeling the profound necessity of this journey being one of independent strength, unburdened by any external influence. The flight was long, giving me ample time to reflect, to mentally prepare for the confrontation that awaited. The city felt familiar, yet foreign, a place steeped in the intellectual history my family had so desperately clung to. But my perspective had transformed. The stately brick buildings of Harvard, the quiet reverence of the libraries, they no longer intimidated me. Instead, I saw them for what they were. Grand structures, capable of housing both profound truth and elaborate deception. Monuments built on the very foundation of ideas that could be twisted and corrupted. The weight of their intellectual legacy, which had once felt like a crushing burden, now seemed almost comical in its superficiality. We met at a neutral, unassuming cafe in Cambridge, a small, bustling place filled with the clatter of coffee cups and low chatter, far from the polished academic circles my parents once frequented. My parents, Dr. Arthur and Alina Hayes, looked a decade older than I remembered. Their confident, intellectual postures collapsed into expressions of profound exhaustion and vulnerability. My father's usually impeccable suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt. My mother, Alina, whose appearance was always meticulously curated, wore a simple, unadorned dress, her face drawn, her eyes shadowed. Their usual vibrant energy was replaced by a palpable stillness, a profound weariness. Victoria, my sister, sat beside them, her usual composed demeanor replaced by a mixture of discomfort and a desperate, almost pleading relief at seeing me, as if my presence alone offered some measure of stability in their crumbling world. She reached for my hand, a gesture I hadn't received from her in years. "Emily," my mother breathed, her voice raspy, barely a whisper, her eyes wide with a fragile hope that bordered on desperation. "You look wonderful, so well. We've been so worried." I offered a brief, almost imperceptible nod, allowing only a fleeting moment of eye contact before I withdrew my hands, subtly declining any attempt at physical comfort or false familiarity. My posture was straight, my gaze steady, refusing to allow their current vulnerability to erase the years of dismissal and condemnation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," my father said, his voice unusually subdued, devoid of its usual professorial cadence, his gaze fixed on his hands clasped on the table. We appreciate your time. This means a great deal." He then made a clumsy attempt to bridge the years of silence, referencing my work. "Victoria said you're very successful with the automobile restoration. I always knew you had a knack for practical applications, didn't I, Alina?" he said, turning to my mother for validation. My mother quickly interjected, her voice still strained but attempting a semblance of their old charm, "And that article about your unique restoration techniques was quite impressive, dear. I always knew you had potential, even if you chose a different path. A surprising path, but clearly fruitful." This revisionist history, this sudden acknowledgement of a career they had so vehemently dismissed, only highlighted their profound desperation. It was a thinly veiled attempt to sugarcoat their past rejection, to retroactively validate my choices now that they desperately needed something from me. The hypocrisy was stark. "Let's be direct," I suggested, cutting through the awkward pleasantries. My voice was calm, professional, utterly devoid of the emotional entanglement they might have expected, a detached observer in their unfolding tragedy. "Victoria told me about the plagiarism scandal, the financial fraud, the legal troubles regarding Mitchell and Hayes' academic press. I'm unclear about precisely why you wanted to see me after nearly 3 years of minimal contact and a formal disinheritance." My bluntness visibly startled them. My mother flinched, her eyes widening, her carefully constructed facade momentarily crumbling, revealing the raw fear beneath. "We're family, Emily," she said, tears finally welling in her eyes, a performance that once might have swayed me but now felt hollow and manipulative. "And family helps each other. This is a crisis, Emily, a complete and utter disaster. We've lost everything." "Family works both ways, Mother," I replied mildly, my gaze unwavering, refusing to be drawn into her emotional manipulation. "It can't be conditional on conformity when things are good and then suddenly become absolute when you need something. That's not how true family operates." My father winced, unable to meet my eyes, recognizing the undeniable truth in my words, a quiet admission of their past cruelty. "I made mistakes, Emily," my mother admitted, her voice trembling, her tears now flowing freely, genuine in their desperation if not in their source. "I was wrong about so many things, about your work, your choices. It's meaningful in ways I didn't understand. You bring things back to life, you work with integrity, while we've been chasing status and money, building a life on lies." The apology seemed genuine in its raw vulnerability, but it was suspiciously convenient, born from necessity rather than a true epiphany. "I appreciate that recognition," I said carefully, allowing a hint of the deep pain their words had once inflicted to color my tone, a subtle reminder of the years of rejection. "But I need to understand precisely what you're hoping for from me now. What do you need?" My father, taking a deep breath, his shoulders slumping, finally answered, his voice barely a whisper, utterly devoid of his usual academic authority. "We may need help, Emily, with living expenses, with legal fees. While this proceeds, we have nothing left, no assets, no income, our reputations are ruined." "So this is about money," I clarified, my voice flat, cutting to the heart of the matter. "It's about family," my mother insisted, reaching out a trembling hand that I did not take, her fingers hovering in the air between us. "It's about survival." Their prestigious academic lifestyle, their carefully curated intellectual empire, had been built on intellectual deception and financial fraud for years, a house of cards that had finally collapsed. "We were terrified of losing our status," my father admitted, his voice hollow, his eyes distant as if reliving the fall. "When you rejected the path we'd laid out, when you chose a trade, it threatened the whole facade. It made us question everything. It was easier to cut you off than to face our own doubts, our own insecurities about our values, about the validity of our own life choices. So you disowned me instead of questioning your own ethics," I stated, my voice calm but firm, and my mother whispered, her face pale. "Yes, it was easier to cut you off than to face our own doubts. To admit that our lives were not as pristine as we presented them to be. We built a beautiful lie, Emily, and you, with your honesty, exposed its fragility." I looked at them, truly looked at them, stripped bare of their academic robes and their intellectual masks. I felt a complex mix of sorrow for their downfall and a profound sense of vindication. Their intellectual empire, once a source of immense pride, now lay in ruins, exposed for the sham it was. I firmly told them that I would not sacrifice the life I had built, the genuine success I had cultivated, to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. However, I also wouldn't see them destitute. I offered financial assistance for basic living expenses, help in finding modest housing, and a recommendation for a reputable, ethical lawyer who could guide them through the legal quagmire. "This is a business arrangement," I explained, my tone unyielding, "not an eraser for past behavior. Any future relationship, any rebuilding of trust will need to be cultivated slowly, with new boundaries and based on mutual respect, not on pretense or convenience. It will be on my terms now." My father, defeated, nodded. We understand, Emily, thank you." Victoria, for the first time, looked at me with something resembling genuine admiration, a flash of shared understanding. "You've changed, Emily," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet awe, "in profound ways. Good ways, you're stronger than we ever imagined." "Manufacturing precision," I replied, a small, wry smile touching my lips. "And restoring the broken. It teaches you to see things clearly, to identify the root cause of a problem, and to solve it methodically, honestly. You learn what's truly solid." I felt the quiet confidence of engaging with my painful past from a position of profound strength, a strength forged in the very crucible of their rejection. The family who had disowned me for my perceived lack of intellectual value now looked to me, the mechanic, for stability, for practical solutions, precisely because I had rejected their prescribed, dishonest path. The reconciliation unfolded gradually, a painstaking process of rebuilding trust on a new foundation, stripped bare of the old pretense. I helped my parents find a modest apartment in a quiet Boston suburb, far from their former opulent life, and ensured their basic expenses were covered through a carefully structured, no-interest loan. My father eventually received probation, avoiding jail time but facing crippling financial penalties and public disgrace. My mother avoided criminal charges but was stripped of her professional licenses and faced significant civil penalties, her once glowing reputation in tatters. Their names, once synonymous with academic excellence, were now linked to scandal. 6 months later, I cautiously invited them to visit me in Los Angeles, a gesture of conditional peace, a test of our new, fragile boundaries. "This is lovely, Emily," my mother said, looking around my humble but meticulously cared-for bungalow, her eyes taking in the eclectic mix of restored furniture and vintage car parts. She seemed genuinely surprised that a life without luxury could hold such genuine warmth, such profound contentment. "Your home feels happy," Ben observed gently to my mother, his arm around my waist, his voice kind but firm. "Because it's authentic. It reflects who you are, not who you pretend to be, like Emily's work." My mother studied him, seeing beyond surface metrics for perhaps the first time, and nodded, acknowledging his honest, rewarding work. At a quiet dinner that evening, my father, devoid of his usual academic pretension, asked about my current restoration project, genuinely engaged for the first time in my career. "Don't dumb it down for us, Emily," he said, surprising me, a flicker of his old intellectual curiosity rekindled. "We should understand what you do. Tell us about the engineering challenges." I explained the intricate technical aspects of a particular engine rebuild, the complex interplay of mechanics and historical preservation, and he listened intently, even asking thoughtful questions that surprised me. "I spent 30 years in academia," he reflected, his voice tinged with a deep regret, a wistfulness I'd never heard from him before, "and I never created anything that directly, tangibly helped people. These machines you restore, these classic cars, you bring them back to life. You preserve history, you create joy for others. I wish I had understood that sooner, Emily. I truly do." Our contact became limited but more authentic, no longer strained by false expectations. My mother's congratulations on my engagement to Ben came without any trace of disappointment about his non-academic profession, a quiet acknowledgement of my happiness, a genuine smile replacing her usual forced pleasantries. She even sent a small, handmade gift, a simple gesture far more meaningful than any lavish, status-driven offering she might have made in the past. The most profound change, perhaps, came when my mother emailed me months later, not with a request, but with an invitation. She was mentoring a group of women re-entering the workforce after long breaks, many struggling with self-worth after their own professional setbacks. She asked if I would be willing to speak to them about my career in automotive restoration, acknowledging its dignity, purpose, and profound satisfaction, and my journey of building a life true to myself. 2 years after the shattering formal disinheritance, I hosted a different kind of family gathering in my new home with Ben. Victoria, no longer focused on chasing academic glory, had left her professorship and joined a nonprofit archival preservation initiative, finding quiet joy and true intellectual satisfaction in restoring historical documents without the pretense of publishing for prestige. My parents, having lost everything, had found a quiet purpose in community service, assisting local libraries and community centers, their intellectual gifts now serving their community rather than their egos. My father raised a toast, his voice surprisingly clear, devoid of its former arrogance. "To Emily, who knew what was truly important long before the rest of us figured it out. To courage and to finding one's own path. And to second chances," my mother added, her eyes meeting mine across the table, filled with genuine affection, "at building a family based on who we are, not what we own or do, and on what truly matters." As glasses clinked, I felt the final pieces of an old wound healing, not forgotten but transformed. The legal document that had cast me out had, in fact, freed me to build a life of authenticity, integrity, and genuine purpose. The family that had rejected me had been forced to confront the emptiness of their values, finding their own difficult way to something more meaningful, just as I had when I walked away from their expectations years earlier. Success, I had learned, wasn't measured by comparison to others or by accumulation of status markers. It came from aligning your outer life with your inner values, from creating rather than consuming, from connections based on authenticity rather than advantage. As the evening wound down and conversations flowed around me, I caught Ben's eye across the room. His smile reflected the peace I felt, not the triumph of having proven my family wrong, but the quiet satisfaction of having proven myself right. The journey from rejected daughter to family anchor had been painful and unexpected. But standing in the home we had created, surrounded by people now striving for genuine connection rather than superficial impression, I recognized that sometimes being cast out is the first step toward finding your way home to yourself. Have you ever had to redefine success on your own terms, or felt the pressure to conform to expectations that weren't your own? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of finding authentic purpose resonated with you, please make sure to subscribe and share this story with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional path has profound value. And true success isn't measured by others' expectations, but by the courage to build a life that reflects your own values and integrity. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that the greatest liberation comes from owning your truth, even when it means walking away from the familiar.